record. Okay, good to go. All right. So good evening, everyone. It's been a while since we've gathered together to study some Torah, but I am pleased that we're to be back. I hope everyone had a fantastic Pesach and associated days in the interim. Let's begin. So we are now standing in the period of time, the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, and it is customary, and I'm just going to turn off my phone so that I don't get interrupted rudely. It is customary for everyone to study Pirkei Avot, which is a tractate, a volume of Mishnah that focuses on, moral improvement. How could we become better people? It doesn't discuss, the proper time to say the Shema. It doesn't talk about when do you eat the korban, when you make the korban Pesach. It doesn't talk about what kind of sorts of indemnities one has to pay if they commit a damage, or how to maintain certain levels of purity. Here we talk about how to be good people. And there is perceived to be a parallel between Pirkei Avos and Sfira, because there are about 6 chapters of Pirkei Avos. There's a 7th chapter that was added that's actually not from Pirkei Avos. It was a collection of various moral statements and ideas, or that was found in Maseches Sanhedrin, I believe it is. But I guess the idea is that you should say 1 chapter for every 1 week of the Sfira. And again, there are 7 weeks. There's 6 chapters. We almost have the entirety of the Sfira covered with chapters from Pirkei Avos. So let's begin. We're going to start at the very beginning. We have the very first Mishnah over here, and just talk about style. We're going to be reading the Mishnah. We're going to be translating the Mishnah. We're going to be explaining the Mishnah, and then I'm going to be illustrating a lesson from the Mishnah that can be found about great rabbis of the past, influential leaders, as well as just historical anecdotes, personal anecdotes, and Jewish-wide historical anecdotes, in order to perhaps better understand what the Mishnah is trying to teach us. So we start here at the very beginning. Moshe kibel Torah mi Sinai. Let's see how Sefaria translates it. Moshe received the Torah at Har Sinai, u'misora leYehoshua, and he transmitted that oral teaching to Joshua, to Yehoshua, and Joshua himself, he transmitted it to Zakanim, to the elders, uZakanim leNevi'im. The elders then transmitted the Torah to the prophets, uNevim misarua la'anshe knesses hagedola, and the prophets then gave over the received traditions to the men of the great assembly. Haim Amru Shlosha Devarim. The men of the great assembly said the following: Havu Misunim Bidin, be very deliberate in judgment, which means to say, don't jump to any hasty conclusions, especially if you're judging a case in a court of law. Be very judicial. Pe'amidu Talmidim Harbe. Establish many students. Please, mute people as I can. Establish or teach many students the Asusiyag Torah, and he says, create fences around the Torah. What are fences around the Torah? Well, these are practices and rabbinic injunctions that are put into place to help support the Torah lifestyle. For example, when we talk about muktzah, when we talk about not touching things on Shabbos that are not Shabbos appropriate, that wasn't part of what the Torah originally said when it said keep the Shabbos. When the Torah said keep the Shabbos, it meant the 39 forms of labor that are prohibited on the Shabbos. But that doesn't mean you can't pick up a pencil and play with a pencil. It doesn't mean you can't pick up a hammer and just fidget with it. The Chachamim said if you're going to start picking up that hammer, you might come to actually hammer a nail. If you pick up that pencil, you might start writing. So as such, there are certain safeguards that were put into place to ensure that Shabbos not be desecrated. But the major thrust of this Mishnah is the idea that there is an oral transmission. There was a transmission. There was part of the Torah that was given over by Moshe at Har Sinai. Moshe was the receiver of the Torah, and he heard, for example, put on tefillin every single day. When he went to the Jewish people and said, put on tefillin, and that's what's written in the Torah, put on tefillin, it does not say in the Torah what tefillin are. How are they supposed to be written? what are they, what are you meant to, how often are you supposed to with them? What scrolls are they supposed to incorporate? What exactly are there? That's where the oral tradition came in. Moshe heard from Hashem, make tefillin. Moshe asked, okay, how do we do that? And Hashem told him about these black boxes that are going to cost an arm and a leg come several thousand years later. And that's what Moshe communicated to the Jewish people. So that was part of the received tradition, an oral teaching that explained what the Torah says. What happens if you don't live with the oral tradition? Well, you end up with some rather troubled observances. Let me give you an example. There was once a non-Jew who wanted to be Megayer. He wanted to convert to Judaism. So he goes to Shammai. Shammai was the great Talmudic, the great Mishnaic sage. He went to Shammai and said, Shammai, I want to keep the Torah, but I don't really buy into all the rabbinic tradition stuff. I just want to keep what's written in the Torah. Shammai tossed him out on his ear. So the same gentleman went to Hillel and said the same thing to Hillel. So Hillel said, okay, sure. Starting tomorrow, we're going to begin your conversion classes. So the Gentile shows up the next day, and Hillel introduces him to the Aleph Beis. He shows him an Aleph and says, this is an Aleph. He shows him the Beis, this is a Beis. He showed them a Gimel, this is a Gimel. And he showed him a Daled and said, this is a Daled. Okay, now spend the rest of the day reviewing. So this gentleman reviewed the Aleph, the Beis, the Gimel, and the Daled. He stayed up very late into the night, memorizing what the Aleph looks like, how the Beis curves at the end, and how the Daled has a little bit that juts out at its tail end. He shows up the next day, and Hillel says, okay, now for your next lesson. This letter over here that looks like an Aleph, this is actually a Dalet. This next letter here that looks like a Beis, that's not a Beis. That's actually a Gimel. This letter here that looks like the Gimel, that's actually the Beis. And this Dalet that you see right here that you learned yesterday, that's actually the Aleph. So the gentleman asks him, well, that's the exact opposite of what you told me yesterday, to which Hillel said, of course it is. That's what the oral tradition is all about. You can't just look at a text and know exactly intuitively what it means. There's an oral tradition. Just like even what the words mean, how we pronounce the letters are part of that oral tradition. You can't keep the entirety of the Torah without knowing exactly how it's meant to be kept. The oral tradition is there to ensure that the Torah is actually the Torah. I actually had a really interesting experience recently. I took my bike into the shop, and there was a lady there, and this lady was wearing hemp clothing. She was quite obviously like a neo hippie, but she was there and she had tassels, 4 of them in fact, coming out from underneath her shirt. And I asked her, "Are those tzitzis?" She looked at me because I'm not sure she was familiar with the Ashkenazi pronunciation. I do not believe she was Jewish, but she said, "Oh, tzitzit, yes, these are my tzitzis." So I asked her, "That looks really interesting. How many wraps around, and how do you tie the knots, and how many times do you wrap around? Because it just didn't look the way they have." Just, "Oh, no. I don't buy into all that rabbinic Talmudic stuff. I just read what it says in the Bible, and it says you got to put fringes on your garments. So one of the strings have to be blue, and that leaves me a whole amount of artistic license." And there's a lot to the tzitzis. The number of times we wrap around the strings, and the number of knots that we tie. There's significance. There's meaning to all of it. There is 3,500 years of tradition that goes into how we tie our tzitzis. You can't separate that from what the Torah says. The Torah the oral tradition is not simply there to limit artistic freedom. The oral tradition is there to help us ensure that we know how to keep the Torah in the mitzvahs. All right, can you scroll down to the next Mishnah, please? Okay. All right, so we go down to, yes, Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was from the remaining members of the men of the Great Assembly. Hu Haya Omer, he used to say the following thing: Al Shlosha Dvarim Ha'olam Omed. The world stands on 3 things: Al HaTorah, on the Torah; Al Ha'avoda, on the service, either the temple service or tefillah, prayer; Al Gemilus Chasodim, as well as acts of kindness. Why does the Mishnah not say charity? Why acts of kindness? Well, acts of kindness are much more all-encompassing than acts of charity. There's a story that's told about Baron Jacob von Rothschild, a distant relative of mine, but he was a very well-known financier. He was a well-known wealthy man about town who lived in France, who lived in Paris, and he was also known as a very generous philanthropist. He would share his money very generously with anyone who had a legitimate need. So there was this Eastern European Jew, we're going to call him Reb Shmuel. Reb Shmuel had lived in Eastern Europe, so you know what that means, that he was poor, and you know that means that he probably didn't eat all that much, but he made do with what he had. He had 5 daughters, and they lived a very frugal, very simple lifestyle, and they were able to get by, but all of a sudden, magically, these 5 daughters of his were old enough to get married, and he had to pay a dowry, which means he couldn't just get by frugally anymore. In order to marry his daughters off, he needed to actually get some geld. So he decides he's going to go off to Paris and ask Baron von Rothschild, again, that distant relative of mine. I have this weird combination. I'm a distant relative of Karl Marx and Rothschilds. That's right. Like you can feel the tension just by looking at me. My genes are revolting against themselves. But it is true. My great-great-grandfather was a Marx, and my great-great-great-grandmother was a Rothschild. Good times. That's the Yekische side of the family. That's my father's mother's family, the German side. The rest is all cold, uncaring Litvak. Let's go. At least I'm on time. So Reb Shmuel goes to Paris. He goes to the shul that is known to be near the home of Baron von Rothschild. He goes to shul, but the shul's already finished davening. But there's this one man sitting in the back with a short little beard who has a Gemara open in front of him. And the schnorrer here, we're calling him Reb Shmuel, assumes that gentleman there who's learning Gemara, that must be the sexton, that must be the shamish. So he waits for this gentleman to close his Gemara. This gentleman closes this Gemara, and Rabbi Shmuel asks him, can you please direct me to the home of Baron von Rothschild? So the man said, well, you know what? I happen to be going that direction myself. Why don't you come along with me? So they did. They made their way. The man pointed out Baron von Rothschild's house, and he actually came in the door alongside with Reb Shmuel. Not only that, but he didn't even knock. He just opened the door, and Shmuel just sort of followed in. The shamish just walked through the hallway, turned the corner, entered a room. He heard the door close, and all of a sudden, a butler comes around and escorts Reb Shmuel to Baron von Rothschild's waiting room. He goes to Baron von Rothschild's study, and there he sees the shamish. Short little beard, the guy who was learning Gemara, it was Baron von Rothschild. Baron von Rothschild heard the man out. Okay, here's 100 francs for each of your daughters, 500 in total. Here's an additional 1,000 francs. I'm a charitable guy. People ask me for money all the time, and I give charity. I very rarely have the opportunity to do acts of chesed. My butler usually does all the chesed. I don't actually feed the people, he does. You gave me a very rare and unique opportunity. Here's some extra funds for you. The Chachamim say that acts of kindness can be done for the poor, can be done for the wealthy. You can be kind to anyone. You can be kind to the wise. You can be kind to the poorly educated. You can be kind to the dead. That's what the whole Chevra Kadisha is all about. We do acts of chesed for everyone. You don't have to have any money. You just have to have the heart and the will to be helpful. Acts of chesed are much more encompassing than acts of charity. Hence, the Mishnah says, Gemilos chasadim, acts of kindness, not acts of charity. All right, let's go down to the next Mishnah.
Do they translate it?
Yeah, they possibly do. Listen, translation isn't a science, it's an art. And everybody takes artistic license in the translation. They make it mean what the translator wants it to mean. I don't know, I'm not reading along with this. I did look it up beforehand. I'm just translating as I'm reading, as I'm understanding. And let's go. Okay. Well, acts of piety, that's what it's saying. Gemilos chasadim, that's an absolutely not a correct translation. Chesed is chesed. Everybody knows what chesed is, right? But I guess if you do acts of kindness, you are pious. So it is sort of an act of piety. It's a tangential or circuitous, but possibly true. Okay, Antigosh ish Soko. Antigosh, who was the man of Soko, Kibol Mishimon HaTzadik. He received his tradition from Shimon HaTzadik, the previously mentioned individual. Hu Hoya Omer. He said the following thing: Al tiu cha'avodim ha'mishamshin esarav amanas l'kabel pras. Don't be like those servants who serve the master in order to receive a reward. Ella hevu cha'avodim. Be like those servants ha'mishamshin esarav who serve their master. Shelo amanas l'kabel pras, to not receive a reward. V'hi mora shamayim aleichem, and let the fear of heaven be upon you. So he's talking here about doing the right thing for the right reason, not because you might get your name in the newspaper, right? Essentially, when you're doing a mitzvah, you're not doing the mitzvah because you want to get that ultimate reward that's coming to you. Do the mitzvah because of the devotional act that it incorporates, how it draws somebody closer to Hashem, how it enhances the sanctity, the kedusha of the world around you. Do the mitzvah not because you're going to get rewarded for it. Do the mitzvah because ultimately it's what God wants. There's a story that's told about the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu Kramer, but 18th century, 17th century Vilna, he was a local celebrity. He was one of the greatest and most revered rabbis of his day outside of the Hasidic world. And he was also known to be very particular about the Arba Minim. That's going to be after Mincha Shabbos afternoon. Yeah. Okay. Kind is okay. All right, we looked up in another translation. It's stein, as they say in Yiddish, steht offen Ort. Says it right there on the page. That's right, offen Ort in the Mark scroll. Yeah. I don't know if I ever shared this story. When I was in London, I used a Yiddish expression when I was talking to somebody on the phone. And that person called up the chief rabbi asking, that was a Yiddishism. Is this really the direction the United Synagogue is going? This is in London, the Orthodox United Synagogue. And the chief rabbi who knew me said, absolutely. It's not a statement of exclusion. It's about, that was a comment that's based on a Jewish tradition that goes back many generations. What do we say? I say this also. What do the German Jews, what do the British Jews say when somebody has a yard site? Everyone else in the world says the neshama should have an aliyah. The neshama zol have an aliyah. The soul should be elevated. What do they say in the UK? We wish you a chayim aruchim, a long life. He says, why do we say that? It's because we don't know what else to say. So we say you should have a long life. So that was the chief rabbi's response to somebody querying as to whether or not this was the direction that the United Synagogue was going. I'm going off on a very far tangent here, and I'm pleased. I ask your accommodation, anyways, your indulgence. English Jewry, when English Jewry went one of two directions. Either you maintain your sort of that Eastern European culture, you ate your bagels and you had your gribbiness with the schmaltz, or you very quickly dropped your Eastern European identity and adopted the sort of the native old German community, which was a very different community. And there was a very stark attempt to sort of lose all the trappings of that Eastern European identity, which meant that Yiddishisms, using Yiddish as a vernacular, was not continued to the same degree that it was in North America, where everybody loves the sound of Yiddish here. You can get away with saying anything as long as it sounds punchy and you say it with a Yiddish bren. But it's not as popular elsewhere, and I had to learn to moderate how I spoke to be more easily received by my audience.
When in London, yeah.
That's right. When in London, but no, I still refuse to say waltzed, though. While, always, not whilst in the present tense. Anyways, all right. So the Vilna Gaon, he was very particular about his Arba Minim, and emissaries were sent from the community leadership all over Eastern Europe to try and find a good esrog. And this was 250 years ago. Didn't have good transportation. There were no refrigerated trucks to take things from the Mediterranean region, and esrogs don't normally grow in Lithuania or Poland. So it came from far away, and they usually were not very good quality. And if there was a war, if there was a bad crop, that means that the crop was poor, and you had very slim pickings. So they were really, really struggling. They spent months. They began their search in the summer, which is like 2 or 3 months before Sukkot. Finally, one of the emissaries finds this one guy in this small, tiny little town who has this beautiful esrog, and he asks him, "I will give you any amount of money that you would be willing to, that you could imaginably ask for to buy this esrog." Well, the man says, "Nothing doing. This is my esrog. I'm not selling it." So the emissary, the messenger, said, "Well, I'm buying this for the Vilna Gaon. Does that change your mind?" So the merchant then said, Yeah, that does change my mind. I'll give it to you, but I'm only doing so on the condition that the reward for the mitzvah that Vilna Gaon performs will go to me. So the messenger agreed. He brings this esrog back. There's great jubilation in Vilna, and the Vilna Gaon sees this esrog, and he's ecstatic, he's excited, he's happy. Everyone is partying except for this one guy who now has to tell the Vilna Gaon, I just made a commitment on your behalf. So he unloads to the Vilna Gaon. He tells the Vilna Gaon exactly what the conditions were, and the Vilna Gaon actually celebrates. He said, Baruch Hashem. My entire life, I've been reading this Mishnah from Antignos Ish Socho. I've always wanted to do a mitzvah and do it for the right reasons and never have a thought about the reward in my mind. Finally, I have this opportunity. Yashikah, thank you. Gladly, I will do this mitzvah for the reason that it's the mitzvah, not because of the word that I'm giving. I've now been stripped completely of this concern, completely of this, perhaps this the secondary consideration. Fantastic. Again, serving the master without the intent to receive the reward. Let's talk about Morah Shemaim, the fear of heaven that should be upon you. It's well known that Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the greatest halachic minds of the previous generation, when he would daven the Amida, when he would say the Shemona Esrei, he would stand completely still. Jews tend to bounce around. We tend to shuckle a lot, even as we talk, even as we give a speech, like I'm doing right now. You can't see me on camera because I'm not on camera, but those who are here will see. You know, I'm shifting from side to side as rabbis do. But Rav Moshe Feinstein, when he was davening, did not do that. And he was once asked why he didn't. And he told the following story. When he was a young man, he lived in the USSR, he lived in communist Russia. And he, as a religious officiant, was considered to be an enemy of the people. And every so often, if it was suspected that he had been evangelizing to the Jews, telling them they should keep Torah and mitzvos, he would be pulled into the forerunner of the KBG office to be interrogated, asked about his conduct, what exactly he was up to, what he was doing. And he told how one time it was demanded that he stand at attention. He had to stand absolutely still, as a soldier does when they're on guard. And he said, I never felt so subjugated before. I never felt such an incredible level of submission. And I therefore resolved that if I'm going to ever display such submission again, it's only going to be for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's only going to be for God. So when he would daven the Shemona Esrei, he would stand as though he was at attention, with the exception of the times in the Amida when you do bow. He took that lesson that he learned, that concept, that fear, that palpable fear, reverence for Shemayim, employed that in how he davened. Something that he felt in his everyday life, he used as a lesson, and it empowered how he davened. Next, Mishnah, please. There's a mouse there, you know. Oh. Let's just scroll down. Okay, perfect. Yossi ben Yoezer ish Tzareda, Yossi ben Yochanan ish Yerushalayim kiblu mehem. You have these two individuals, two Yossis, or Yossi ben Yoezer, Yossi ben Yochanan. They received the tradition from the aforementioned individuals. Yossi ben Yoezer ish Tzareda Omer. Yossi ben Yoezer said the following: He beischa beisvad l'chachamim. Your house should be a meeting house for the wise. People should gather there to study Torah. The heavy mis avik ba'afar reglehim. You should be literally, be sitting, making yourself dusty by their feet. The heavy shosa vatzoma es divrei. You should have a thirst for their words. What does it mean to have thirst for their words? I'll tell you a story about Rabbi David Segel. Rabbi David Halevi Segel. He was one of the most important commentators to the Shulchan Aruch. He's the Taz. Do you have the same stories in your book there? You seem to know all the stories. Yes. All right. Either way, he was the rabbi. This was about 1600s. He lived in Poland, and he served as the rabbi of a small community. Again, rabbis in those days, like everybody, earned a pittance. He didn't mind normally, but one of the things he really regretted was that he was not able to afford Sfarim. He couldn't buy books. Books were exceptionally expensive then. And as a result, he didn't have access to many, many works, but he had a didactic memory. He remembered everything that he ever learned. So once there was a mocher Sfarim. There was a gentleman who came through town who was a Sfar merchant, and he had a wagon full of books. And the Taz, as he was called, because he wrote a book called the Turei Zahav, the acronym Tes Zion, Turei Zahav, Taz. David Segel, that's how he was. That's what he was referred to. He looked through to see if there were any Sfarim that he had not yet seen, but he had learned all of them. The Mocher Sfarim could tell that he was dealing with a learned individual, pulled out something from the back, and showed it to the Taz. I believe it was the Masas Binyamin, because the Masas Binyamin was a book that the Taz quotes with great frequency. But anyways, so the Taz realized that this was not a book that he had ever seen before, and he asked how much it was. The cost was about as much as he would have earned over the course of the entire month. It was obviously not something that he could afford. And he told them, the Moicher Sfarim, as such, I can't afford that. So the Moicher Sfarim offered him a discount, still too much. So the Taz asked if he could borrow the book overnight. So he took the book overnight. He brought it back the next day. He told the Mocher Sfarim, here's the book. I've been very careful. I stayed up all night studying it, but you will notice that there's not a single page that's been bent or any stains whatsoever. It's in pristine, perfect condition. Not only that, I know that I have a fantastic memory, and you can't make a living off of letting people read your books so that they don't have to buy them. I'm going to give you a reading fee. And so he paid the Mocher Sfarim what he could for the right to have actually read the book. He never saw the book again, but he quotes from it very frequently in his commentary. The gentleman, the Mocher Sfarim, tried to give it away. The Taz wouldn't accept it. The Mocher Sfarim had to earn a living. I think this is a absolutely perfect example of what does it mean to sort of thirst for Torah. You're making sacrifices. You have an absolute deep-seated desire. You want this, so you try to find a way to make it happen. Even if it's not, even if the answer is yes, maybe we can say, even if the answer will sometimes be no, but sometimes we can say yes to something else. And we see from the Taz this incredible thirst, the thirst that the Mishnah mentions, this idea that we have to have a drive, a bren, a desire, perhaps an all-consuming desire. It becomes a part of our nature to study Torah. All right, next Mishnah. Yossi ben Yochanan, Ish Yerushalayim Omer. This is always a controversial Mishnah. He used to say the following things: your home should be open wide. And the poor of the home should be part of your household. What does that mean? Well, instead, Rashi says this, instead of buying slaves, hire poor people to work in your house. Give them parnasa in a way that is not demeaning. Don't talk too much with women. The Ishto Amru, this was even said about your own wife. All the more so your neighbor's wife. I don't think this is a reference to just simply chatting. I think this is more flirtatious chat, or like sexually charged interactions. It's not always appropriate. The Mishnah here is saying, be sensible, guys. You're going to have to talk. You're going to have to talk to everybody in this world. Make sure that the talk that you have is appropriate. I'm remembering a story in the United States that happened about 15 years ago or so. I don't remember who it was, but there was a senator who went on record as saying that he would never go to get a coffee or to have a coffee meeting with just one.
Well, that's Pence.
That was Pence? Yeah, that was Mike Pence. Okay. He said that was not something he was prepared to do. He would bring his wife along. No, so I think in terms of halacha, that's not a problem. It's in a public place, but there's definitely something to that. Men and women, probably should have appropriate boundaries. What that means, I think that it's up to the individual, and the halacha does have something to say about this. I don't think we're talking about not just saying I don't talk to girls. I don't think we're descending into kindergarten here. I think this is about establishing appropriate boundaries. When is it appropriate to have certain kinds of conversations? It's not always appropriate to say everything all the time. Sometimes the conversations between a husband and wife should not be in front of the children. Sometimes the conversations between an unmarried man and unmarried woman should probably be in a public place. And the kinds of conversations that they have should be appropriate conversations. And he says, as long as you're sort of, if you are perhaps having this inappropriate kind of interaction or speech with a woman, that can potentially cause a negative outcome. And that would also perhaps nullify, the person's not studying Torah when they could be, essentially. The Sofa Yorshganim, that could absolutely lead a person down a bad path. It was a story in London, going back to my UK days. There was a story in London. There was a rabbi who at one of our meetings, there was a discussion. Meeting congregants for coffee is standard. That's okay. That's acceptable. It's normal. I think this individual thought that perhaps a more natural environment would be more conducive to a better conversation. And this individual decided to go for a walk in the park with this female congregant who was not his wife. And that was the cause for some discussion in the United Synagogue, the Rabbinical Council of the United Synagogue, as to whether or not certain guidelines should be given as to appropriate conduct, because a walk in the park is kind of like a date. Probably should not be doing that. What was that? Okay. Next Mishnah. All right. Next Mishnah, Prime. All right. Yehoshua ben Parachia v'nitarho Arbeli kiblu mehem. Yehoshua ben Parachia and nitarho Arbeli, they received the tradition from the aforementioned people. Yehoshua ben Parachia Omer. Yehoshua ben Parachia said the following: "Aseh lecha rav, make a rabbi for yourself. Ukanei lecha chaver, acquire a friend for yourself. V'havei danas kol adam lekafschus, and judge all men, anyone, lekafschus, giving them the benefit of the doubt, judge them favorably." There's a story about one of the Torah commentators that I quote more often than just about anyone else, and that's the Ksav Sofer, Rabbi Shmuel Binyamin Sofer, who lived in 19th century Pressburg. He was once throwing a giant party. He had achieved some victory, and he was able to get the government to pass some kind of legislation. And in celebration, he invited all the Austro-Hungarian rabbis to Pressburg, which is now modern-day Bratislava. And while he was there, everybody was having a grand old time, enjoying the food. I'm assuming they were having plenty of goulash. There's this fleischige potato kugel that the Hungarians make. I don't remember what it's called. My wife sometimes makes it. Yapshik. That's right. Yapshik. Yes, that's right. It is good. It's like a Yiddish it's a Yiddish shepherd's pie. Anyways, so while everyone was enjoying their goulash and their yapchik, he pulled out of his pocket a coin. He said, "Herzachain, my friends, this is perhaps the only such coin that exists in the world. It is super unique. It's a family heirloom. It is a machatzis shekel. It's one of the coins that was used during the time of the Second Temple for the poll tax that every Jew would have to pay in order to afford the communal sacrifices." And he gave it to the rabbi sitting next to him. He took a look at it, and as he was examining, as he was discussing it, he handed it to the next person. Eventually, the coin was making its way around the room as the conversation picked up. But somebody at some point realized, "Hey, what happened to the coin? It's missing." The coin was gone. So Rabbi Shmuel Sofer gets up and says to everyone, "All right, guys, everybody, please check your pockets. Perhaps somebody stuck it in their pocket without thinking. Please check whatever's in your pockets and put it on the table." They do so. Nothing happens. Nobody finds this coin. So Rabbi Sofer says to the assembled, "All right, guys, will you please allow, maybe you absentmindedly put it into your pocket, will you please allow the guy standing next to you to stick their hand into your pockets to see maybe you missed the coin?" There's some old rabbi in the back says, "No, please, let's not do that. Let's everybody check their pockets again. Maybe somebody didn't check it well enough." So this was an old revered rabbi, a good friend of Rabbi Sofer's father. Literally, he was a student of the Chassam Sofer. So that's what they did to accommodate this old rabbi in the back. It still doesn't show up. 15 minutes later, Rabbi Ksav Sofer gets up again and says, "Okay, guys, everybody let the guy next to you check the pockets." And again, the guy says in the back, "Let's not do that, everyone, please. Another 15 minutes. Everybody check their pockets again." Now, meanwhile, this rabbi seems to be going to the back of the room and praying. It looks very suspicious. This happens 3 times. The 4th time, the Ksav Sofer says, "That's not happening anymore. Everybody now stick their hands into their neighbor's pockets to find the coin." As he says that, the shamish comes in and comes back holding the coin, saying, "I found it." What had happened? Well, the help had cleared the table, and they cleared the tablecloth. They shook the tablecloth outside. The shamish thought perhaps it was still on the tablecloth. He found the coin and brought it in. The old rabbi in the back pulls out of his pocket his own exact same coin. He didn't want somebody to check his pockets because he would be accused of stealing the Ksav Sofer's coin. What had happened? Well, he brought the coin, hoping to show it to everyone while he was there. He heard Rabbi Sofer saying, this is the only one in existence. He didn't want to burst the Ksav Sofer's bubble at his party. So he sat on it, literally, back pocket. When the time came for everyone to check their pockets, he knew that his would be found and he would be accused of stealing it. The Ksav Sofer says, this is just, after hearing the story, he commented, this just goes to the extent that we have to employ this idea, this concept of judging everyone favorably. Even sometimes when the evidence looks really bad, sometimes the simplest solution is not the answer. It's the opposite of Occam's razor. Next Mishnah. Okay. We're just going to skip. We're gonna read the next Mishnah. Nitaiho Arbeli used to say the following: Parchek mishachin ra, stay away from a bad neighbor. Valtis chaber l'rasha, don't join up together with the wicked. Valtis yoish min hapur anios, don't despair. Don't despair for puranios. It either means one of two things, Rashi says. Either this means that if you are experiencing bad times, don't give up hope. Sometimes mishap, sometimes bad things happen. Don't despair. Ultimately, there will be redemption. Or alternatively, it is you might see the wicked people getting away with their wickedness and in fact profiting off of it. Don't lose hope. There will be puranias. There will be retribution for them. They eventually will have to pay the piper. Next Mishnah. Okay. All right. Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shattach kiblu mehem. Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shattach received the tradition from the previously mentioned individual. Yehuda ben Tabai Omer. Yehuda ben Tabai said the following: Al tas atzmacha ka'orchei hadayanim. Don't act judiciously, or litigiously rather. Don't be litigious. Which means a lot of people have a lot of different things, different ways to explain what this means. But ultimately, it means, to a certain extent, you just have to just get along with people. Don't act like a lawyer. Don't take sides. Don't advocate for one or the other. There's a lot to be said about this. I come from a family. I have a child who acts kind of like a lawyer. I have a brother who kind of acts like a lawyer. Lawyers don't have a ton of friends. I'm not, except a friend. Unless they learn to separate being a lawyer from their interactions with other people.
Judy's the only one that I know.
No, Judy has an automatic exemption because Judge Judy is great.
Yeah.
And any other lawyer listening to this too. There's the Simpsons gag. This when I was a kid, like there was a lawyer that the Simpsons hired for one reason or another. And the man says, could you imagine a world without lawyers? And you see this picture in everyone's mind of everybody, but regardless of race, creed, religion, they're all dancing together, holding hands. And you see that the lawyer has the same dream and he just shudders. Oh. Anyways, Simpsons used to be funny. All right, let's go. Yehuda ben Tabai, Shimon ben Shattach, kiblu mehem. Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shattach received the tradition from them. Okay, we did this one already. When the litigants are before you, when you're judging their case, you have to judge them both as potentially wicked people. They both could be the wicked person. But when they depart from you, they have to be treated as though, or you have to think of them as though they are now both innocent. When they accept the sentence. There's a story that's told about Rav Moshe Zev Margolis of Bialystok. He was a very famous dayan in the 18th century. And there were two litigants who came before him. In their day, they were famous wealthy people. They were famous builders. One was Zimmel Epstein, and the other one was Koppel Halperin. And the story is recorded in his book, in his sefer. And it was written by his descendants, written by his children. So they're coming before him, and he's about to judge them. So the Shamash takes these gentlemen before Rabbi Margolis and see him acting very strangely. He has his face covered with a talus. And he basically says, Zimmel and Koppel, calling them by their first names, not Mr. Whoever is the plaintiff, state your case. Now, they're both really put off by this. They're taken aback. They're shocked. They're not greeted. They're not welcomed. They're not referred to with their honorary titles. They're just called by their diminutive nicknames, Zimmel and Koppel. So one of them, who's the plaintiff, says that I'm the plaintiff, and this is my case. So then the Rabbi Margolis pipes up, also still with his face covered with a tallis. Whoever is the defendant, state your defense. The defendant states his defense. This is the decision as I see it. Do you both accept my conclusion? They said yes. It's at that moment he takes his tallis off his face and he says, "Oh, Reb Koppel, Reb Zimmel, welcome to my home. And please join me for dinner." What exactly was going on? He says to them, "I have this Mishnah that says I have to view you as both potentially wicked, but I know you guys are great. I can't think of either of you as wicked. I have to cover my face. I can't see you. If I see you, I won't assume that either of you are potentially the wicked person in this instance, let's say. Now that you've both also accepted my judgment, I now am called by this very same Mishnah to view you as innocent. As such, welcome to my home as my guests. Let's go eat." Next Mishnah. Shimon ben Shattach said, "Heavy have marbelachkor es ha'edim." Be very careful and ask a lot of questions to witnesses. But at the same time, you have to be very careful. Be very careful in the questioning, the line of questioning. Because perhaps the witnesses will discern to what end you are striving to achieve. Yilmadu l'shakar. They will learn, they will see how they can lie to perhaps bring about the desired outcome that they wish to see. I had a similar experience. When I was being examined for smicha, my examinations were conducted orally. And the rabbi who conducted my examinations was a man by the name of Rabbi Shmuel First. He's one of the main students of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and he's probably one of the most important rabbinic halachic deciders in North America right now, alive today. He's a Telzer. He learned to Telz Yeshiva, but he's like a walking encyclopedia. He knows absolutely everything, but he has certain limitations in that he can only see a question and an answer. The answer could only be the answer that he thinks is correct. He once asked me a question in the examination: "Is such and such a case permitted?" And I answered him, "Such and such a case should be permitted." He disagreed, and he showed me where he disagrees. And I showed him 2 or 3 other sources that would not conform to that conclusion. And in fact, the answer that I gave was at least was correct according to some authorities. He still marked the question as wrong because it wasn't his answer. And it was at that point that I learned I need to be asking questions from him as he's questioning me. And I picked up really quickly how to ask the question so I can get to the answer that he wants to hear. So I kind of had to do that myself. I was that aide that was telling a lie through the questioning. Be very careful, the Mishnah says. When you're ask a lot of questions, but be very careful how you phrase those questions. Make sure that the connotations of the answer are not immediately understood. All right. Avtali and Omer, next Mishnah, do you have it? Right, Avtali and Omer, Chachamim. What's that? Yeah. I skipped one. Okay. Shemai v'Avtalin kibul mehem. Shemai and Avtalin, they received the tradition from them. Shemai Omer, Ehov hamalacha, love work, usana es harabanos, despise positions of authority or power. Val tisvada l'rishus, don't get too cozy with the government. The government forgets its friends when they're no longer convenient. This is interesting. So I want to cover I do want to finish the parak tonight. So we're just going to continue the next Mishnah. Okay, Avtalion Omer, Avtalion said, Chachamim, wise people, Hizor b'divrechem, be very careful about your choice of words. Shema tachovu chovas golus. Perhaps you will make a halachic decision that places you in hot water and you'll find yourself having to leave town. V'siglu l'makom mayim haroyim. And you'll find yourself in places where your students who will follow you will end up having to drink bad waters. And perhaps they will die. It's all metaphor here. Be very careful, because you might find yourself in positions where your words will be misinterpreted. And as a consequence of your words being misinterpreted, people will come to erroneous conclusions, which can result with some very dire consequences. And it's possible that the Shem Shemaim, the heavenly name, will be desecrated. This idea of being very careful with words is something that does come up in stories about great rabbis of the past. In fact, Rabbi Sol Salanter, who was known as basically the founder of the Musar movement, this pietistic movement that rose to great adoration by many people in the 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century. He was very, very careful about the words. He would speak to packed audiences. He would go from town to town. But if he had to talk about something or someone that was going on in that town that needed some kind of rebuke, he would make sure that everyone would see. He would ask the question, I am now about to ascertain whether or not I'm allowed to say this publicly. He would pull out a Sefer Chofetz Chaim, which is a handbook on proper speech, what things are you allowed to say and what things you would not say. He would look it up. He would quote the relevant part of the Sefer Chofetz Chaim to say that this is acceptable for the following reasons. And then he would share what he had to say. He was very careful about his words. He always ensured that they met some kind of halachic metric that meant that they were proper things that should and could be said. Next Mishnah. All right. Hillel v'Shammai kiblu mehem. Hillel and Shammai received the tradition from the aforementioned individuals. Hillel Omer Havet mitamidav shel Aharon. Be like the students of Aharon. Ohev shalom, love peace. Verodev shalom, chase after peace. Ohev esabrios, love mankind. Umekarvan LaTorah, and bring them closer to Torah. There's a story about the first Belzer Rebbe of Aaron of Belz. He once went to his shamish, to his assistant, and said, "Can you please make me a good cup of coffee with some good cookies on the side?" Now, Rav Aaron of Belz was known to be something of an ascetic. He didn't drink coffee and he never ate cookies. So this was a very weird, strange request. But the shamash, he's hired to do what the Rebbe asks him to do. So that's what he did. He made a good cup of coffee and he brought some good cookies on the side. He brought them to Rav Aaron of Belz, and Rav Aaron of Belz said, "Oh, very good, thank you. Bring them to the tailor." What had happened? The shamash brings them to the tailor. The tailor is absolutely shocked. Not half an hour earlier, he and the Belzer Rebbe were at the mikveh. And the tailor made a comment, my soul would be so revived if I had a good cup of coffee with some nice cookies on the side. Rav Aaron Belzer didn't know what good coffee was, didn't know what cookies tasted like. These weren't the things that he normally ate, but he did know about reviving souls. So he made sure this tailor had the cookies and coffee that he wanted. He really loved people. Next Mishnah. Hu haya omer, he used to say, nigad shema avad shema. One who tries to publicize their name will eventually lose their name. People who chase after honor don't end up achieving honor. But the lo mosif yosef. If you don't add times to study Torah and do mitzvos, eventually you'll be collected without having done those mitzvos. Udalo yolef ktolachayev. Somebody who does not teach. Some people translate it to those who don't study. I believe it's the cause of those who don't teach. You perhaps perhaps there are better ways you could spend with your time. If you have the ability to teach, you have something to give, you should teach. And somebody who utilizes the crown of Torah for personal gain will ultimately lose it. Next Mishnah. Hillel used to say, if I'm not for myself, then who is for me? And if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, then when? There's a story that's told about Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin. He eventually became the Rosh Yeshiva of the yeshiva in Volozhin. He was very well known for his diligence, his extreme ability for long stretches of Torah study. Before he became the Rosh Yeshiva, was just a student at Volozhin, but he was such a well-respected student that ultimately the Rosh Yeshiva at the time, Rabbi Yitzchak Volozhner, selected Rabbi Naftali to be his son-in-law. So soon after Rabbi Naftali is married to Yitzchak's daughter. The yeshiva marks Yom Kippur. Everybody after Yom Kippur goes home. The Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yitzchak, goes home, but he notices that his son-in-law isn't there. He asks, where is Naphtali? So the family goes out to try and find him. Where do they find him? They find him in the yeshiva. What happened? Well, Rabbi Naphtali noticed something. He explained, this is such a holy, special day. And this base medrash where people study is such a holy, special base medrash. It's just not appropriate that after such a very special, significant, holy day, this very significant, special, holy base medrash should be without somebody studying Torah. So he spent some time studying Torah before he came home to say Havdalah. That's the, if not now, when? Sometimes that now is after Yom Kippur. All right, we have just a few more to do. Shammai Omer, Shammai says, Asay Torah Keva, make your Torah a something set that you do. And more ma'atva say harbe, speak little, do much, and greet everybody with a smile. There's a story that's told about Eliyahu Hanavi. There's so many legends and stories that are told about Eliyahu Hanavi, but somebody once went to the Belzer Rebbe and said, Rebbe, I want to meet Eliyahu. So the Belzer Rebbe said, okay, you have to stay up all night studying Torah for the next 40 days. So that's what the chassid does. He spends the next 40 days studying all night. So then he goes to the Rebbe and says, what should I do now? Okay, on the 41st day, go to the base medrash and lock the door. Make sure there's nobody in the room with you. That's what the chassid does. But that night, there's this massive snowstorm, and there's this Jewish peddler who's walking down the road and knocks on the door, asks to come in. The chassid says, you know, there's another base medrash around the corner. If you want to come in to get out of the cold, why don't you just go there? Eliyahu doesn't show up. So then he goes to the Belzer Rebbe the next day and said, what happened to Eliyahu? The Belzer Rebbe asked him, well, didn't somebody knock on the door? Yeah, somebody did knock on the door. Some poor peddler, but I sent around to the base medrash around the corner. You would have merited to see Eliyahu if you would be willing to not meet Eliyahu to do a kindness to somebody else. Because you weren't willing to do that kindness, because you weren't willing to receive everybody with a pleasant countenance, then you lost your opportunity to meet Eliyahu. Rabbi Gamliel said, "Asay l'cha rav, make for yourself a rav, a rabbi v'histalik min hasafek. Remove yourself from any kind of doubt as a consequence of having somebody who knows the halacha. Ba'al tarba la'aser ad amodos. And when it comes time to actually give charity, don't give by estimation. Give legitimate amounts, the amount that perhaps you would that would be inappropriate to give." Shimon beno Omer, Reb Shimon, the son of Rabbi Gamliel, said, "Kol yomai, all of my days." Godalti ben hachachamim. I grew up surrounded by wise men. I never found anything better for the person than being silent. Not only Torah study is the important part. I said it has to translate into good deeds also. Anyone who spends too much time speaking ends up causing chait. You know, there's that story about Lincoln. He was once criticized. His speeches were very short compared to what other presidents and other politicians were giving in those days. The Gettysburg Address was viewed in his generation as a disappointment because it was so brief. And he was once accosted, "Why do you speak for such short periods of time?" He said, "Well, it's better to be silent and be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt." I believe that's in Aesop's Fables also, but I know it from Lincoln. All right. This is the final Mishnah. I believe it's the final Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, Al shloshet dvarim ha'olam kayim. The world stands on three things. Al hadin, on justice and judgment. Ba'al ha'emes, on truth. Ba'al ha'shalom, it sits on peace. And how do we know this? Shenemar emes u'mishpat shalom shiftu b'sha'arechem. Execute truth and judgment of peace within your gates. There's one final story that I'll share. This will be the last story. I believe this is the final Mishnah. But this last story is about a man by the name of Rabbi Yitzchak of Drovich. He was known to be exceptionally truthful. He was always above reproach. And, no, the police never had any reason to suspect him of any kind of crime because he was just had such an incredible reputation as being somebody who always told the truth. And some people tried to take advantage of that. So somebody smuggled goods into the country. He knew that he'd be strung up if he was caught, and the police were after him. So he asks what his name was, the Spravedlover, which means the truth lover. Will you please hold on to my smuggled merchandise? If you're holding on to them, nobody's going to ask you. Nobody's going to suspect you might have them. And if you're going to have to do this because otherwise I'm going to get killed. So Rabbi Yitzchak is sort of pushed into a corner, but he doesn't want to be in a position where if somebody asks him, do you have smuggled goods? He has to be able to say, no, I do not have them. So what does he do? He says, okay, I'll hold on to them, but I'm not going to hold on to them as your property. I'm going to buy them. How much are they? Astronomical sum. He pays the astronomical sum. He takes them home and burns them. The police come by and he's asked, are you in possession of smuggled goods? No, I'm not. You see that the world stands on truth, and sometimes the truth calls upon us to pay astronomical sums so that we can end up burning the stuff so that we don't have to tell a lie. Anyways, that's the first parak of Pirkei Avos, and I'm now open for questions, comments, and or rebuttals.
Speaking of American history, anything about George Washington?
It's above my son. There were no cherry trees in North America at the time. They were not imported until the 1800s.
All right.
All right, and anyone who's online, you can unmute yourself, and I can gladly hear any question you'd like to ask. All right, I guess I didn't do a good enough job. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night, Rabbi. Thank you.
On each side. Lane, didn't even have to look to make that pass.
Like the story about Leo and Avi.
Good night, Rabbi.
All right, good night, Phil. Thank you for coming.